I don't think Ice Cube knows who the puppeteers are. He understands that there are puppeteers, and he can tell from his own experience both.
And that was to destroy East Coast rap. And what I mean by that, and I know people gonna be like, yo, Gene is out of his mind and everything like that. Check this out.
What if I told you the real power in the music industry isn't in the hands of record labels or faceless executives, but in the grip of two names you already know? Ice Cube says Jay-Z and Diddy aren't just superstars, they're the gatekeepers, the ones who decide who rises, who falls, and who gets erased forever. And the price of fame, it's darker than money, secrets, blackmail, and rituals that could destroy careers in a single night. If that sounds unbelievable, stick around, because once you hear Cube's warning, you'll never look at the industry the same way again. Ice Cube has never been one to sugarcoat things. So when he told his story on The Breakfast Club and put two very famous faces on the idea of who really calls the shots, listeners sat up. For years, we pictured the power players as nameless executives in the back rooms. Cube named names: Jay-Z and Diddy. He suggests they're not simply artist earned, they're the gatekeepers who decide who climbs and who stalls. He describes the industry less like an open market and more like an exclusive club with a velvet rope. That rope isn't neutral, it's enforced. According to Cube, Jay and Diddy don't just build empires, they steward access. If you're on their list, doors open. If you're not, opportunities evaporate. The currency here, he argues, isn't always cash or streams. There's a darker ledger at work. This isn't just about tough negotiations or carefully timed PR. Cube paints a picture of a system that polices behavior and enforces conformity. When someone starts stepping outside the prescribed lane, the response can range from mild surveillance to blunt containment, and in some cases, an outright shutdown. The industry's pattern, he says, repeats. Stars rise, then sometimes burn out in ways that look suspiciously intentional. For the artists who cooperate, the payoff can be enormous: protection, promotion, and elevation into an almost untouchable circle. For those who resist, the fallout can be brutal: careers quietly ground to dust, relevance erased as fast as a trending hashtag. That's the benign version. Cube hints at darker practices beneath the surface. He talks about gatherings and favors that bypass paperwork and vanish into whispered obligations. Secrets, he says, are collected like trophies, ammunition that can be deployed if someone steps out of line. Contracts are one thing. Leverage over someone's reputation is another. When you control the narrative about a person, you control their options. Rumors about initiation rituals circulate, not mystical rites in the theatrical sense, but coercive power moves designed to bind people with shame or silence. These aren't one-off tests of loyalty. Insiders whisper their ongoing obligations. Miss a payment in this moral economy, and the consequences aren't merely financial, they can be existential. Veterans in the business warn that the worst outcome isn't simply being cut off, it's how swiftly everything can be dismantled. Records shelved, deals canceled, public perception flipped. Careers can be erased with astonishing speed, an invisible guillotine, some say, and then the old explanations resurface. When things feel too deliberate for mere bad luck, people reach for the Illuminati narrative because it supplies a tidy villain. Cube tiptoes along that line, joking when asked if secret societies run the show, but never quite selling the punchline. When the music stops and the dust settles, what matters is who remains standing and who gets left out of the room. Maybe there are no ceremonial robes or secret handshakes to point to. Maybe you simply recognize the powers by who they invite in and who they choose to keep out.
I'm talking about the club of gatekeepers that we all gotta deal with.
Their alliance sits at the center of everything. Jay-Z and Diddy have weathered feuds, courtroom rows, and seismic changes in culture that wiped out plenty of contemporaries. Scan their resumes: early collabs, high-profile charity gestures after disasters, red carpet tableau that present them as hip-hop's elder statesmen, glasses raised, cameras circling. They project loyalty, yes, but also the unmistakable signal that reaching that altitude usually requires buying into a system. Look closer and you'd see the calculus. Access granted, favors exchanged, reputations curated. Not everyone who climbs that ladder pays with their own chips. Sometimes the cost is carried by someone else. Quietly and forever. That idea is what sends conversation spinning toward Beyoncé. It's almost taboo to voice it, but people ask, was Beyoncé's trajectory strictly the result of talent and timing, or did it unfold with orchestration behind the scenes? Jay-Z's imprint on her story is a matter of public record, but some wonder whether his role ever crossed from mentorship into something more contractual and clandestine, terms the public will never see. Her breakout from Destiny's Child into solo stardom happened as Jay-Z's influence was solidifying. For skeptics, the coincidence looks a little too tidy. Others chalk it up to good timing or mutual artistic chemistry. Still, whispers persist about private rooms and handshake deals where phones are left outside and NDAs are thicker than industry memos. Early collaborations with Diddy, including pivotal moves around her solo launch and the seismic success of Crazy in Love, feed the puzzle. Were those partnerships simply creative alignments, or did they represent strategic clearances from the people who control the corridors of power? The unanswered part is the price. If there were bargains struck, their terms wouldn't appear on album liner notes. That silence fuels speculation. Who benefits, who sacrifices, and what gets traded away in exchange for the spotlight? And then there's the human toll. The folks who might tell the tale, bodyguards, personal assistants, sound engineers who saw the backstage calculus tend to either walk away with a check or disappear from the story. We all remember producers who once seemed destined for mainstream success yet ended up running sound at local weddings while muttering about having crossed the wrong people. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe a reminder that in this business, the margin between triumph and anonymity is narrower and more controlled than it appears.
Potential. Jay was more quiet. But I mean, I learned that Jay was being quiet because he was taking notes. He was taking notes, observing everything, taking it all in. Because, sometimes you're around and you're watching to see things to do. But some people are around.
The darkness thickens when the conversation turns to Tupac. This is where rumor bleeds into real fear. Every year, new whispers surface, but some insiders insist Tupac's death wasn't just another tragic outcome of coast-side rivalries or a random act in Las Vegas. The version that circulates most loudly, he left behind a final tape, a lost recording in which he, allegedly, tried to name the true power brokers pulling the strings, pointing fingers at figures like Jay-Z and Diddy, and even an alleged Illuminati puppet master. People tell different stories about what happened to that tape. Some say those closest to him hid it. Others claim the so-called gatekeepers seized it. A few believe it now sits in a vault, biding its time until someone leaks it. If it exists, the tape is offered up as the missing link, the evidence that would reshape how we interpret Tupac's death and why his name is spoken so cautiously in certain rooms. The narrative paints Tupac as one of the clearest-eyed observers of the industry's power map. He allegedly recognized that crossing particular lines could mean more than career sabotage. It could invite a total erasure of everything you'd built. For skeptics, the Las Vegas shooting reads as the grim punctuation to that warning, either a violent episode born of street conflict or, to others, a deliberate silencing meant to keep others in line. Voices like Suge Knight's, now filtered through prison walls and conjecture, only complicate the picture. Is he fanning flames for attention? Or does he hint at truths that can't be said aloud without risk? With stories this charged, certainty is scarce. What remains are fragments, whispers, and a lot of questions that keep the rumor mill alive. But to really understand why this story refuses to die, you have to look at how these narratives spread and why they stick. Conspiracy stories thrive where there are gaps, missing documents, unexplained actions, and the ordinary human hunger for a neat cause and effect that can tie loose ends into meaning. Tupac's life and death already occupied a mythic space, a raw mix of talent, fury, politics, and poetic grievance, so any suggestion of a hidden final confession becomes irresistible. The idea of a tape takes that myth and turns it into a potential smoking gun, a physical object that could translate rumor into record. That's why the tape, real or imagined, functions as a cultural symbol, not just of what might have been said, but of everything people feel was taken from him. Equally important is the way power works in public life. When artists die young under chaotic circumstances, the vacuum is quickly filled with narratives shaped by who benefits from silence and who benefits from story. Those with influence can shape the message by controlling access, limiting testimony, or simply outlasting the curiosity of a headline cycle. The result is a record that's patchy and contested, eyewitness accounts that conflict, forensic details that invite second opinions, and official conclusions that leave plenty of room for suspicion. In that fog, competing explanations flourish, some reasonably skeptical, some wildly speculative, and all of them feed public imagination. Then there's the social dynamic. People who claim to have seen or heard things often have motives that range from grief and revenge to self-preservation and attention. A disgruntled associate might hint at hidden tapes to regain leverage. A loyalist might suggest suppression to explain why inconvenient truths never surface. That doesn't make the claims true, but it does explain how a rumor can be both persistent and slippery. The more emotional the subject, the less likely a tidy resolution becomes. Legal and institutional realities matter too. Even if a recording existed, chain of custody rules, statutes of limitation, and privacy protections could keep it out of public view. Prosecutors only pursue certain leads. Newsrooms have legal teams that weigh libel risk. Families sometimes opt for privacy over exposure. All of these pragmatic constraints mean that even explosive evidence can remain buried simply because the cost of exposing it is high for the people who might hold it. Finally, we should reckon with what the rumor says about public faith in institutions. When official accounts feel incomplete or unsatisfying, people turn to alternative narratives to fill the moral void. The tape story is as much about distrust in law enforcement, in media, in the industrial networks of fame, as it is about any single piece of evidence. It's a mirror. The louder and more specific the rumor, the more it reveals about society's need for accountability and the depth of skepticism toward those who run cultural machinery. So where does that leave us? With a mosaic of possibilities rather than a single answer. The tape may be real, a myth, or a blend of both. An object that embodies grievances, fears, and unanswered questions. Whether it ever surfaces, the tale will continue to function as a way for people to grapple with Tupac's life and the unresolved power dynamics of an industry that turned artists into empires. Until concrete, verifiable evidence is produced and authenticated, responsible discussion has to live in that uneasy middle ground, acknowledging the rumors and the pain behind them, while resisting the urge to convert rumor into unproven fact.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make.
The shadows thicken around the details that never quite disappear. Witnesses who go missing, recordings that vanish, autopsy notes that don't add up. Why was the other passenger in the car hardly harmed? How did the shooter melt into the night while the initial police response felt oddly cursory? Why did Tupac's inner circle suddenly seal off access blocking reporters, rewriting timelines and cutting quiet deals? The more you pick at the seams, the less like luck it looks. When people whisper that Tupac might be alive somewhere far away, what they're really saying is the truth felt too dangerous to survive the light. Jay-Z and Diddy, unsurprisingly, respond the way anyone with vast resources would: categorical denials, heavy legal teams, and a relentless forward motion as if the rumors were static on the roadside. Lawsuits come and cameras roll, allegations pile up, yet the levers of influence remain firmly in place. Whether or not a secret society exists is almost beside the point. An exclusive club does operate, and its leadership is painfully visible. We're left peering through the threshold, guessing who will be ushered in, who will be left to knock, and who will ultimately foot the bill. Beneath the PR smiles and charity galas is another Hollywood most people never see and very few will describe aloud. This is the scene Ice Cube alluded to: hidden negotiations in blackout rooms, where the mundane trappings of fame meet something more transactional. Former handlers and ex-bodyguards paint a bleak picture of overnight meetings that resemble psychological operations more than social calls, intended to break resistance and secure compliance before any public deal is struck. The mechanics are brutal and banal at once. Phones surrendered at the door, non-disclosure agreements stacked with the same zeal tax auditors reserved for audits, cameras set to record the worst moments, then archived as future leverage. People laugh in those rooms, but the laughter is paper-thin. It's a currency, not a comfort. That's how leverage is manufactured, and why walking away, clean and whole, feels like the hardest contract of all.
Part of the indictment, that's somewhat like a blackmail. He was blackmailing people to be in the freak-offs. So that's federal. That could be that's a federal charge. He can't blackmail people to say, yo, listen here, you did it once and you're gonna do it again. that that ain't gonna make it with the governor.
The shadows thicken around details that refuse to disappear. Missing witnesses, vanished tapes, odd autopsy notes. People point to the passenger, who walked away almost unscathed, the shooter who melted into the night, and a police response that felt oddly uninterested. Then there's the sudden, coordinated silence from Tupac's inner circle reporters shut out. Timelines adjusted, stories quietly rewritten. The more you pry, the less accidental it all seems. When someone whispers that Tupac might be alive somewhere far away, what they're really saying is the truth felt too dangerous to survive in public. Meanwhile, Jay-Z and Diddy respond the way powerful people often do: forceful denials, expensive lawyers, and brisk moves forward as if the rumors are static noise. Lawsuits pile up, cameras follow, allegations keep surfacing, but the control points stay intact. Whether or not a secret society exists is almost beside the point. An exclusive club clearly functions, and its leadership is painfully visible. We watch the doors and wonder who'll be let in, who'll be left out, and who will ultimately pay, behind the glitz and charity galas. There's another Hollywood most outside observers don't see: a private world Ice Cube hinted at. In those blackout rooms, the calculus of fame gets negotiated, windows shuttered, phones locked, and people moved through rituals that former handlers describe as psychological warfare. These aren't polite business meetings. They're pressure chambers meant to erode resistance and buy compliance. The alleged mechanics are chillingly mundane. Phones collected at the door, NDAs heavier than legal textbooks, tripods recording the worst moments. Laughter in those rooms is a currency, not comfort. That's how leverage is built, by capturing moments people would trade everything to bury, and why walking away clean feels almost impossible. Rumors persist that the blackmail files themselves would make federal agents raise an eyebrow. The stories are consistent. Young hopefuls summoned to private events with rules explained only after the fact. A drink that loosens you, an instruction from someone with limitless resources, and always a camera rolling. Sometimes the footage is humiliating. Sometimes it's worse: encrypted evidence kept as insurance for the gatekeepers. The message is simple and brutal: stay loyal, or watch this become your headline. You don't hear people on the record admitting any of it, but the pattern is hard to ignore. Artists whose careers skyrocket and then implode after the wrong choice. A singer who topped the charts only to be blackballed after changing managers. A comedian who hinted at the rituals and suddenly found himself unbooked. The public sees the fallout: retirements announced at 30, one-shot producers reduced to local gigs, and draws a line between cause and coincidence. For every cautionary tale, there's a tragedy. Artists who pushed back, who asked too many questions or refused to play the game, become either legendary warnings or quiet losses. Industry sacrifice is now its own search term on YouTube. A steady catalog of careers scorched, reputations tarnished, and people who vanish from the spotlight. Some disappear with payouts, others simply shut their mouths and never speak again. When someone like Ice Cube breaks ranks, the tremor is real. He promised to talk to people and the industry felt it. Insiders who might have laughed him off years ago suddenly watch social feeds and wait for the next shoe to drop. A rumor on a podcast can be ignored. A legend naming names cannot be so easily shrugged off. The threat gets real, not because those called out are the only power holders, but because toppling a few could expose a whole system. Look at Diddy's recent legal storms, raids, allegations, courtroom showdowns, and you start to read them less as random falls from grace and more as warning shots. Mess with the wrong people, and the machine appears capable of retaliating. Yet through it all, Jay-Z remains composed, smiling for cameras, never showing a crack. Nobody wants to be the next cautionary example. Listen closely in interviews, and you'll hear the silence in action. Nervous laughs, abrupt topic changes, a veteran swapping questions about mansion parties for safe small talk. That coordination reads almost comical if it weren't so consequential. Families, empires, and livelihoods depend on everyone playing their part. A single offhand word can burn years of work. Who is brave enough to risk that? If even a sliver of the stories about humiliation rituals, blackmail tapes, and forced silence are true, the industry isn't merely flawed, it's dangerous. The same network that turned poets into billionaires also seems to police which scandals survive and which are buried. That's why betting on celebrity silence remains a reliably profitable gamble. So what will it take for the truth to come out? Another icon willing to risk everything? A whistleblower, armed with receipts? Or will the gatekeepers simply tighten their grip and remind everyone who runs the room? Ice Cube's warning landed like a thunderclap because it reminded people this machine has run the same way for decades. And those who try to expose it often pay dearly. The only certainty is that the questions aren't going away. Or are we fated to watch the same loop play out, secret after secret, buried until the last truth is gone? Drop your most out there theory below. Who really pulls Hollywood's strings? Is the Illuminati chatter just online drama? Or have we been looking the wrong way while the real power quietly works the room? Subscribe for more hidden histories and untold chapters. Remember, in an industry built on silence, asking the uncomfortable questions is sometimes the only way to pry a door open. Stay curious, keep your camera ready, and don't stop watching.